Hi guys, so today we're going to talk about hourly pricing because it's like the best way that you can charge for your design work, and because you can do this stuff hourly based pricing.
Who are you?
Well, I'm project based pricing. It's the better way to go to price your work.
No, hourly pricing is the best.
No, it's all right. Just calm down. It's all good.
No,
have a look at project based pricing. It might help you out.
Okay, fine.
You take it.
I got this.
You take it. Don't worry. Jeez. G'day guys, talking about hourly based pricing and why it might not be the best fit for your business. But having said that though, you can still use hourly in certain contexts. So let's get into it. G'day guys, okay, so we're talking about hourly pricing. Now, to give you some context, there is hourly based, there is project based, and there is value based pricing. We're gonna cover hourly because we're gonna leave the other two for another day and just purely focus on hourly. Now, I said at the start of the video, look, it might not be the best way to price your work, and personally, I'm not a fan of hourly based pricing. However, there are, as I said as well at the start of the video, there are some contexts where hourly can work for you based on the kind of client work that you're doing. But let's focus on those reasons why hourly might not work best for your business. Now, the first is pricing yourself out of the market. Now, if you take a step back and look at your internal hourly rate, which we figured out on a post on Instagram maybe 2 weeks ago now. So you might have your internal hourly rate set at $40 to $50 an hour. Your internal hourly rate is basically your external hourly rate if you charge by the hour. So if it's $40, $50, $100, whatever it is, depending on how much you need to make in a year, and you can figure out that calculation from that post, you can price yourself out very quickly if you're increasing your rate at the same time as your experience is increasing. So the more your work you're doing for clients, obviously your work becomes better and you've got more under your belt to prove how good of a designer you are. But you then in turn basically want to raise your rate. So if you're starting at a very kind of low rate of $20, $30 an hour, and if you're starting at, that's totally fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're starting at that rate and then you want to up it and double it, let's say from 20 to 40 and then to 60 and then to 80, 100, and then you get up to some crazy figures like $200 an hour, $300 an hour, which is pretty much what our time is worth when you get to a very senior kind of experience level of design. But then you become that person that gets into the territory of being like a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that, and people are going to kind of look at you funny and go, you're not saving lives here, or you're not getting me out of jail, you're creating me a logo, or you're creating me an app or a website. Come on, that's crazy. It's $300 an hour. That's, can you get it done in 1 hour? So that's the problem right there, is that when you get up to a higher rate and you times that by the estimated number of hours you have for a project, let's say you do branding, you create logos and that kind of stuff for clients. Now let's say a typical branding process might take you 30 hours over a course of whatever weeks, but 30 hours, let's say. Now 30 hours by $200 an hour, that's like, hey Siri, what's 30 times 200? Okay, so $6,000. That's not a bad rate, to be honest with you, for a branding identity job. But I guess it depends on the market value. Now that's a whole nother conversation of what is, a relative market value, and we're going to cover that another day. But to get to that level of just that psychology of having a $200 an hour, or $300 or $500 an hour rate is going to blow your client's mind, and you're going to be like, maybe I can lower it. But what happens is you're basically pricing yourself out, to be putting it bluntly. Now, the second reason is that hourly based pricing becomes quantifiable. Now, that's not a good thing for two reasons. The first, for you as the designer, is that if you are an efficiently fast designer, so you're really quick at what you do, you can create a logo in half the time as what a typical designer might take to create that logo, you're shooting yourself in the foot right there, because you're not charging as much as you could potentially charge and penalizing yourself just for being efficient and quick. The other side of things is that if you consider yourself as a bit of a slower designer, you're not as quick as you think you can be, what's going to happen is that you're going to get better at what you do over time, but your hourly rate is going to absolutely kill you because you're going to be earning less and less and less for doing the same exact job, but quicker. Now, the penalty for your client is that if you are a slowish designer, let's say, and you take longer than what they consider is quick and efficient, then they're being penalized. So if you're quoting, let's say, 15 hours and things blow out to 30, and just because you haven't got yourself on the ball and you've not really factored in how long certain things take to do, that's when the client gets the absolute shits. And that's a big part of why I don't like the idea of hourly-based pricing. But I've got to add an extra little bit there to the quantifiable nature of why hourly-based pricing isn't the greatest ideas. And it's because you get to a situation potentially where, and I've seen this many times with other designers, I haven't experienced this myself, is that you provide your invoice at the end of a project and it has 30 hours times one logo. And the client reads that and goes, you know what, Frank, we've looked at your logo, we've looked at your invoice, and to be honest, we're thinking this probably only should have taken you 20 hours. What the fuck? It's exactly what you are thinking in your head when a client comes back to you, when they put on their I know best hat, I'm a designer, I know what I'm doing here. Resentment builds up like a motherfucker. I can't stress enough that hourly-based pricing is a bad idea when it comes to this type of situation. Now, the next reason is the psychology of the smaller number. Now, the smaller number is probably going to be, in this situation, if you're charging hourly, your hourly rate, which could be $50, $100. That is what the client is going to heat seeker missile focus on out of all the numbers you're going to present to them. The smallest number possible, because that's what they can present to their team or sit much more pretty in their head by looking at that smaller number and focusing on the smaller number. Because what they're going to be thinking is that it probably won't take that long because you're a professional and you can get things done quickly, much quicker than what they can do. What they're not focused on is that number times the amount of hours you're going to take that equates to $1,500. So if I was to give you a comparison with, say, marketing land, you've no doubt seen this example happen, in the real world, in that when you see a product that is advertised, especially with like Afterpay, where there is a product that has 4 easy payments of $49.95. People are focusing their bloody attention on $49.95, not the actual cost of $200. So that gives you an example of why people focus on the smaller number, and that's why you advertise the smaller number in that context. But for you, to avoid the elimination of doubt in your client's mind and avoid the hassle, avoid the heartache, advertise the absolute shit out of the total estimated cost. You should be thinking $1,500, $1,500, $1,500. That is the price that you should be telling your client. If you have an hourly rate, sure, that's how you're figuring out the final rate based on your estimate, but you should be screaming from the rooftops that is going to be your final rate. And that's the reason why I think you should focus on project-based pricing, because that's the only figure that you're advertising, that's the only figure that your client will give a shit about. Which leads me to the next point, where the scope isn't definitively defined when you're doing hourly-based pricing. So having an ambiguous hourly rate that could potentially be based off a guesstimate, look, let's be honest here, it definitely could, pales in comparison to having a fixed fee that a client knows exactly what they're going to be paying at the end of that project. But for you, it remains just as simple. If you've quoted $3,000 for a project fee total for that client to pay at the end of a project, and your internal hourly rate is $100, that means you have to do that job within 30 hours to remain profitable. If you do it in less, even more profit. If you do it more than that, you're losing money based on that hourly figure, which is totally fine. You can make it up for it in different ways, but just be aware that's what you are going to have to do in a project-based fee. Now, to give you an example of why ambiguity in a lack of defining your scope can absolutely hurt you in the long run, is that when you have a client that says to you, Frank, I don't care how long it takes, take as long as you need. What's your hourly rate? Great, $100 an hour. Go for it, man. Just get it done for me. What the client's really saying is, Frank, get the fucking job done as quick as you can, mate. I need this, because I don't want to look back at past me and think, why the hell did I say as long as it takes? That's not what I meant. I need this job done now and for as cheap as possible. That's business right there. So don't let your client put themselves in that sticky ass situation where they regret what they say, because I guarantee you that's not what they meant. And one last point on the not having your scope defined is revisions. Now, a client never considers revisions. You should be, definitely, but a client's never thinking this is going to need revisions. You should be getting this done first, second go, that's within the required revision time. Now, if you're adding revisions, what I would say to do in that situation is to be upfront before doing so. Say that when you start a project may require revisions. Be as upfront about that. So your scope of hours could be from 30 to 50 hours at most. So you give them a price range based on your hourly rate of saying it could take $3,000 to $5,000 to get this job done, in addition to any further revisions that you need as the client if you have changed the definition of what the scope is going to be. So if they want to change this or change that, and it's gone past the revision period that you've included in that initial scope, you need to be damn upfront about it, because they're really not going to like you turning around at the end of a job saying, well, you wanted all these revisions, this was extra time here, which was an extra 20 hours, and they're going, what the fuck? So be very mindful and upfront about it at the start of every engagement if you are going to go down the road of hourly based pricing. Now, the second last reason why I don't think hourly based pricing is the best way to approach pricing a client job is just purely for the fact that you can't typically take a deposit from a client. Now, you could, I guess, where you could say, if a job's 30 hours, you could take half of that estimated hours, say 15 hours worth of work, and charge that up front, because you know that that job is definitely not going to get done in 15 hours or less. But that's generally not how hourly works. You need to be having done the work first, had those hours put in, to then be able to produce an invoice for that client to pay. That's kind of the long and short of it. So having that deposit in the can for you to work with in the event that the client goes AWOL or the relationship sours or for whatever bloody reason, having that deposit there is a good security blanket for starting any engagement. I would highly recommend doing so, especially if you're thinking of doing project-based fee. Now, one of the other points is having to document your time religiously with software or manually, whatever it is. It's an absolute pitfall which wastes some more time in your day to make sure that you document the absolute shit out of what it is you're doing, how long it took, so the client knows when you give them their itemized list of what took what when they go asking for it, in those really crappy situations where they do, you're having to put that time into something that you could be better spending in creating a better piece of work for that client if you had that fixed fee. That's it. Having said that though, if you are going to do hourly based pricing and you don't track that stuff, you need to get on that fast. Okay, so the last reason why I think hourly pricing is not a good idea for pricing your work is that ballpark estimate I've been talking about. So if you're giving that client 30 hours, that is what they are expecting. If you come in under 30 hours, you are an absolute champion. If you go over by let's say more than 1 or 2 hours, you are going to be the most hated designer in their world right there and then, because you've gone beyond what you quoted and people hate that. I've had that situation where I've been quoted a certain amount of time for a job when I moved house, and they went overtime by 3 hours, and man, I was absolutely not happy. So when you quote something, make sure you come within that estimate by 2 hours or less. If it's more than that, God help you. And the reason for that is that the client has a budget. Now, if you've quoted $3,000 as your estimate, that's what the client is going to be expecting to pay. As long as you're being upfront about extra costs, that's a whole nother story. But this is a reason for having project-based pricing, in that you have a fee that the client knows what they're having to pay. You know what you're having to charge and come within, and that time to remain profitable, and it's far, far simpler in the long run. Now, I said at the start of the video, there are some certain instances where hourly-based pricing has its place. The first of which is if you work with an agency. Now, agencies or production houses, where you work as a contractor / freelancer, whatever you want to call it, typically ask for your day rate. Now, to work out your day rate, it's pretty much just your internal hourly rate times by 8 hours or 10 hours, depending on what their production days are generally like. If it's a half day rate, you would just slash it in half or add an extra hour on top of it to basically get cover for you for the travel time. Okay, the second would be for consulting. So if you're going to be doing in-person meetings or even over the phone meetings where you want to charge an hourly fee for that engagement, for maybe that initial engagement that you do have with a client for discovery or things like that. If it's for more than 2 hours though, I would suggest doing a project fee so that way it's fixed and determined of what that person is going to be expecting to pay for your time. And then the last one is out of hours work. Now, if you have a project scope and it only determines for you to work within, let's say 9 till 5 p.m. and a client wants something that is after hours that takes up your personal time, let's say from 6 p.m. onwards until 6 a.m. or something like that, that's where I would be charging an hourly fee to basically penalize them for your time because they're taking up your time. What I will say is though, don't just charge your hourly rate, add on the inconvenience tax, which is maybe 1.5 to 2 times or more for having to take up your personal time outside the defined scope of hours that you do offer them as a service provider. So keep that in mind. And one thing to finish, if you are going to go down the route of doing hourly based pricing, think of the following things. The first of which is defining that scope, getting it really solid so that client knows exactly what they're in for when charging hourly. At the end of the day, you may as well be charging a project-based fee if you're quoting an exact amount of hours and not wanting to go past it, but hey, that's totally up to you. And the second would be to advise of any variables, especially like extra time that might go into a job. As long as the client knows and you're upfront about it and they're fully aware of it and they totally understand that, make sure of that. The third point is that just because someone's paying you for your time doesn't mean they own all of your time. Now you need to be advising your client that you segment your work into little buckets, let's say in a day or a week or a month or whatever it is. So you advise that client of the time that you will take to actually complete the job because it might not all be done in just one block. Something to keep in mind. And the fourth one is to document your time and your process thoroughly. So if your client does want to go over your invoice with a fine-tooth comb to figure out how long that bloody project took, how dare you take longer than the agreed amount of hours, you've got it all there as a backup. And the last point would be that if you are going to go over your allotted time that you've estimated to a client, advise them as soon as possible. If you know you're getting up to that 30-hour mark of a 30-hour estimated job, and you think it's going to take another 5, 10, 20 hours, let them know as soon as possible because they're not going to want to see an invoice that says 50 hours instead of 30 that you quoted them. They're not going to be happy. Or you're just going to have to shoulder that burden if you don't want to have that conversation with the client and take an absolute hit on that job. All right, that is it for hourly based pricing. Now, I hope you took away something from this video. If you're looking to change from hourly to project based fees and you're a bit on the fence, I would highly recommend doing so. Or if you want to be real damn ambitious, look into value based pricing. It's a whole nother kettle of fish and will blow your mind. But project based fees are, for many designers, the best way to approach your client engagements to avoid a world of hurt that hourly based pricing can introduce into that relationship. So give it a go. I highly recommend it. Now, if you watch this video on YouTube, give this a like, a comment, or subscribe. If you're into that kind of thing. On Instagram, same thing, like or comment or share if you're that into it. But one thing I do want to ask is that if you do have some questions about hourly or project-based or value-based pricing, leave them in a comment below, whichever place you're watching this, and let me know. I would be happy to get you even on a podcast. If you want to be on a podcast, the Two Red Chairs podcast that I've got now going here on G'day Design Live, I'd love to have you and talk about the way that you want to structure your fees for your design business. I'd love to chat about that. Anyway, I'm Frank. Thanks very much for watching G'day Design Live. See you next time.